Today, we're talking all about wacky rigs in the spring, one of the most successful and proven presentations that we know of. But wacky rigs are way more versatile than you ever thought possible. And today, we're going to be looking at some ways to do wacky rigs, how to rig them, how to use them that you've never even seen before. Stick around. You don't want to miss this one.
There we are. Come on, buddy. Stay down. Ooh, that's pretty good. Get up here. I want to ski you in so you can't. Boy, he's a pretty good fighter. That's a pretty good fight. Oh, he's a good fish.
Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and today we're talking all about wacky rigs in the spring, one of the most proven and successful presentations that I can think of. If you're a bank angler, wacky rigs are an essential part of your bass fishing arsenal. And even if you're fishing offshore in a boat in some deeper water, don't sleep on a wacky rig. Trust me, there's some ways and some techniques that you can still use wacky rigs to catch lots of fish. And we're going to talk about them. They're going to seem weird, they're going to seem strange, but trust me, these actually work. But before we get started, if you like bass fishing content that tries to be inclusive, whether you're fishing from a boat or whether you're fishing from the bank, and always thinking about budget because not everyone has a lot of money to spend on bass fishing gear, then this is the channel for you. Click that subscribe button below. And while you're down there, give this video a like. I would really appreciate it. So this is our starting point. Whenever we think of a wacky rig, this has got to be it, right? Just a Senko or a stick bait. In this case, this is a Yum Dinger on a hook with a band and hooked like that. Now, I like to hook mine sideways. Some people like to hook them perpendicular. Whichever, go with what your preference is. I've got a Gamakatsu G Finesse hook. This is more of a drop shot hook, but I think it makes a great wacky rig hook. Some guys like to use a longer shank hook. There's nothing wrong with that. Use what works well for you. Now, as far as the rod and reel and everything, I've got it on a spinner. 10-pound braid. Now, I like to use braid because I can really bomb it. I get such a longer cast putting braid on my spinners. You don't have to. If you're using something like fluorocarbon, then 10-pound fluorocarbon should work just fine. As far as my leader, I've got an 8-pound co-poly leader. A lot of times I'll use a fluorocarbon leader, but that's going to help that wacky rig sink just a little bit, depending on the type of worm that you're using or the type of bait that you're using. I've got a 7-foot medium light rod. This is pretty bendy. It doesn't have a lot of backbone. And that means I can really cast this thing out there. Setup matters when it comes to fishing a wacky rig. You've got to be able to cast it and you've got to be able to work it, and you definitely need to be able to land those big fish whenever you get strikes. So I like a medium light rod. It's got a softer tip. Again, I can sling this thing out there quite a ways. Now, that's the basic. That's the setup that everyone thinks of whenever they're thinking of a wacky rig. But even with that, there are several things that we can do to play around with things to make things more appealing to those springtime bass. And one of the very first things that I do, and you can see by the Yum Dinger I had on there, is I like to use crazy colors. I'll use oranges, I'll use blues, I'll use chartreuse. I like a lot of black blue flake. I like colors that stand out. I am not interested in matching the hatch. I'm not interested in matching the hatch at all, especially in the springtime. In the spring, I fish crazy colors when I'm fishing a stick bait. It doesn't matter if it's a Waco rig or a wacky rig or a NACO or a Texas rig worm or whatever. I like crazy colors. You know, this is just a cream worm here, and this is another cream worm, and these are the ones that I like. You know, $1.25 in that box at Walmart. Don't worry about how cheap they are. They catch fish. And I like these because they tend to be very durable. They don't tear up after one fish, or whenever you rig them up in a different way. You can take them off and you can put them back on and they're not going to fall apart. That's why I like them. But as I said, rigging different types of worms, rigging different colors that are not matching the hatch. Sure, if you want to use green pumpkin, watermelon, red flake, or whatever, that's fine. But I suggest trying something really crazy. Try something like a dreamsicle orange or a bright spearmint blue. I'm telling you, you're going to get reactions you didn't think you were going to get. You know, back in the day, it's like this worm here, like this yumdinger, right? This was common back in the day. Everybody threw purple worms, which is why I use this. And this got bit because, of course, it did, because purple worms work. Now, another thing that I like to do, well, that's when I'm going to adjust the size of the worm that I'm using. So that's what we want to do sometimes. You notice that I'm still got very loud colors. This is your bubble gum. I've got one that's kind of in an alien green, and then just like a good old caramel brown. None of these could be accused of matching the hatch, with the exception of maybe the brown. These stand out very brightly in the water, and they're actually quite a bit shorter. These are 4-inch, and they might even be 3.5-inch, but this is a standard 5-inch stick bait, and it's a simple way of making that bait more appealing, especially on days when those bass are being a little bit more finicky. Now, you are going to have to let these fall slower. You're going to have to count longer because these are going to creep down in the water, you know, depending upon the type of worm you're using, whether it's heavily salted, whether the type of plastisol it is. If you're using something that's got Elastec in it, you know, you're going to be there a while because that dude is not going to sink, which is why I don't recommend using Elastec worms on a Wacky rig unless you're trying to use them as some sort of topwater, which is not a bad idea. Wacky rig a Z-Man worm and work it as a twitch across the topwater. I've never tried that. I just thought of that just now, and something I think I want to try. But using a smaller worm can be a great way to elicit strikes when those bass are feeling finicky. And I know you said lowbrow. What if you're fishing in some deeper water? What if you're fishing on a bluff wall, or what if you're fishing from a boat? Well, my go-to is going to be a weighted Wacky rig. And I know everybody and their brother sells a weighted Wacky rig hook. It seems to be the biggest thing. But you don't need any of that. Shaky head. That works just fine. These little Bass Pro little Ned heads that I like, this will work just fine. Anything that you can put that worm on and get it to sink down. And the faster that you can get that worm to sink down, you can fish deeper water with it and you can be super effective. So just because you're working from the boat doesn't mean that you can't use a weighted Wacky rig to get that bait all the way down there. And as you guys have seen before, I like to use something called the stupid rig or the Wacky jig, which is basically another way for me to take a skirt off of a bitsy bug, off of a bitsy flip, and catch fish that way. In my fisheries where I have a whole bunch of vegetation and a whole bunch of timber and a whole bunch of slop, it's something I have to have. I can't work an unprotected hook. I'll just get hung up, or I'll just be bringing back a mop head full of slop on every single cast. And it works. Now, the thing I also do is, and I get, this is going to be the shocker. This is probably going to be one of the biggest shockers. I don't let my Wacky rig fall all the way to the bottom. I know that's not how you work a Wacky rig. You let it fall all the way to the bottom, you pop it up, you let it fall all the way to the bottom, you pop it up. That's not how I work a Wacky rig. I let my Wacky rigs go down to where I believe those fish are suspending. I rarely let them fall all the way to the bottom, and then I pop them up. I do the same thing other than I don't let them fall all the way to the bottom. Ever since I started doing that and keeping them as more of a suspended bass sort of presentation, my hit ratio, my strike ratio has gone through the roof. And another thing is it reduces the amount of time I have to wait between each time I work that bait, which allows me to cover a little bit more water, allows me to work just a little bit faster. And obviously, I probably did it out of being impatient, but it's one of those things where being impatient actually worked in my benefit because I was catching more fish. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about now. A couple of tricks that I do that totally change Wacky rig fishing. And no, it's not the Waco rig. I'm not going to talk about that in this video. But there is something that I like to do which adds drag to that worm. It makes it fall a little bit slower, but it also gives it a lot more action in the water. And I've talked about this before, and you guys seen me use this technique before where I take this take a pair of scissors, and I just cut. I cut tentacles and tendrils along the line of that worm. Sideways, you don't have to be super careful or super finessey with it, because the bass don't care, and it doesn't take much. You could just do just a little bit like that, and then come back on this side and cut it, and just open it up just a little bit, and then you create that flare right there like that. You create those little tendrils, and you do the same thing on the other side too. So when you're wacky rigging it, it's almost like having a skirt on either side. And I have seen wacky rigs with skirts on them do the same thing on that side, and as it falls, those flap in the water. But another thing it does is it does add drag, and it causes it to fall a little bit more slowly. And as it falls, these ends go up just a little bit. So it's all kind of added together and gives you just a little bit of a different effect. So if you're fishing more shallow water, if you're fishing water that tends to be, a little bit more clear, where you can use a visual presentation in that way. Again, I'm not going to fish that in anything more than like 8 feet, 10 feet at the absolute most. But if you are fishing that more shallow water, and especially on those days when the bass seem to be finicky, like they want something different, try that out. You will really be surprised at how well, just putting those little tendrils on your wacky rig, how well they can work. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about, this is the game changer. This is the one that really shocked my mind. I'm going to show you how to rig something wacky rigged that you never thought about doing before, and it catches fish. It's just a silly way to catch fish, and that is with a tube. Wacky rigging a tube. And we're going to do this a little bit differently. This is something that I just don't slap on there. And for this, I am going to be using a bigger hook. I like an O'Shaughnessy hook with a longer shank. This is a 2-aught. I'm going to take a 1/8 ounce bullet weight. Now, I want the one that's got the pointy tip if I possibly can, because what we're going to do is we're going to shove this 1/8 ounce bullet weight down into there. We want that to go pretty far in. And then behind where that weight is, we're going to take this hook and we're going to wacky rig just like that. We don't need a tube. We don't need a wrap, rather. We can just do like that, and we can just start making casts. And it was crazy because a buddy of mine suggested this to me years ago. And I didn't think it was going to be any good. I was like, all right, sure. And I tried it. And the very first time that I fished this crazy contraption, I caught fish. So I never looked back. It just works. I'm telling you, even if you're in the deep south, stop sleeping on tubes. If you're in the deep south, try using tubes. And a great place to start is by wacky rigging the tube. I caught more fish with this silly thing than I can ever count. So those are just some of the ways that you can do wacky rigs in the spring. Be inventive. Come up with your own ideas. Look at the needs that you have as an angler. If you have a particular brush pile you're wanting to fish, or if you're having some type of water, some type of color, or whatever, be inventive. Think about your needs as an angler, and think about, I wish there was a bait that could do this way, and then design some kind of contraption on your own. It may not work the first time, but you can refine your ideas. I spent a lot of my time, a lot of my angling time goes to coming up with new and crazy contraptions. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you know that. But try it out for yourself, and if you get some good ideas, put it in the comments below. We would love to hear about it. So there you have it. Some crazy ways to rig and fish wacky rigs during the spring. They work so well. If you haven't tried fishing a wacky rig, I'm telling you, give these tricks a try and watch how many fish you can catch. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.